In this tutorial, we will look at how to add multiple lives to our player and how we can deal with respawning when the player is killed. So the idea is that we're going to give the player a number of lives. So we're going to add this to the top of our code, and we're going to have a timer that checks for respawning. What we wouldn't want to happen is that the player gets killed for bumping into something, and immediately they come back to life in the same place and get killed again. So we're going to respawn after a certain amount of time to give things a time to settle down. I'm going to go to my Birkdale Teams replit, and I'm going to come down to Chapter 9, Customize Your Own Code. And when I launch that, it will then give me a basic game that has player movement with speed and some NPCs who randomly wander around. So if I go to my main.py, it looks a little bit like this. I am going to fork this code. This happens for you automatically when you open this project, but for me, I would be changing the original, so I'm going to click on fork, but you don't need to do that. So remember that in this code you may already have added some design patterns. Your code might look different to this, so you will have to adjust where things are happening, but roughly it's about putting them in the correct section. So the first thing we're doing here is setting up some lives variables and a respawn time. So I'm going to just come down here to just above my game loop. I'm going to put in here lives equals 5 and respawn, and I'm spelling that with a capital S, what we call camel case. So respawn time equals 0. And what that means is there's no respawning going on at the moment. There's no delay before we do anything. Okay, so we're all good to go. And we now need to do something about killing off our main character. So what we're going to do is, in our check collide, instead of getting points for bumping into things at speed, we're just going to say it's going to return one event, 1 point, if things bump. So I'm going to go and find my check collide code here, which should be above the game loop. And you can see I have indeed got the section where it's based on how fast you hit them, how many points you get. But I'm going to, I'll actually just comment it out. So I'll put a hashtag there. And then at the end, I'll say return 1. So if a collision occurs, we get 1 point. And if no collision occurs, there's no points to worry about. Okay, so that's good so far. What we now need to do is quite an extensive change to the game logic. So I'm going to come down here to, should be very end of the standard code. I'll just move this out so that we can see it. So you can see here, when each monster is looked at, we check if we collided with that individual monster, and if we did, we add on the score based on how fast we hit them. Well, that's just going to check whether we actually hit them at all now. And actually, we want to comment that out. So what we want to do instead is every single frame, and I think I have to move in 1 space here, score equals score plus 1. So we get points just for surviving. Okay, now what we're going to say is we're going to check for bumping if we're not currently respawning. So there's no point in checking for a bump while we're respawning. So we're going to say if respawn time is equal to 0, which it is most of the time. So if we're not respawning currently, then we're going to check collide. I'm just going to copy and paste this to save me making a lot of typing errors. So we're going to do that. Now what are we going to do about it? Well, we're actually going to assign this to a bumped variable. So bumped equals the results of that. Now, if we're not a respawn time of 0, so if we're currently respawning, then we're going to say bumped equals 0. We can't bump while we're respawning. That would just be make the game ridiculously hard. Okay, what we're now going to do is look at what's going on here and change how many lives we've got. So if we bumped something, then bumped has got a value. So we're going to say down here, if bumped is greater than 0, that means we must have hit something. So lives will be lives minus 1. And that's fairly straightforward. We've just lost a life. But if we have lost a life, we should then start to respawn. So we're going to say respawn time equals, and we're going to have to get some sort of sensible timeout. This is based on a number of frames. So I'm going to say, I think we've got a time clock.tick of 30, so 30 frames per second. So I'm just going to say 30 times 2. That should be a 2-second respawn. Okay. The other thing we need to worry about is what if we just lost our last life? So if lives double equals 0, so if we've got a comparison of lives and it's turned out that it's 0 now, then that's the game over. So we should say that done equals true. So we've got no lives left, the game is finished. We're done. Okay, so if we bump something, we lose a life and we start to respawn, that means we need to take care of that respawning thing. So you can see that what we're going to have to now do here is check where we're at with the respawn. Now, a little bit tricky here. If we wait till it gets to 0, then we won't be able to see what's going on, because we check for 0 is when the bumping's happening. So we're going to say, if the respawn time gets to 1, so it's just about to finish, that's when we're going to do something about it. What we're going to do is we're going to set the X and Y of our player to some random coordinates. Now you can see that we've suggested here that it should be between the size and the max width minus size. Instead of respawning on the edge of the screen, we make sure we're inside the screen by a character's width. So X and Y are going to go to random.randint between the size of the player and the max width minus the size of the player. So that just keeps them within the bounds of the screen. That's for the X. And then the Y is similar. It's going to be random.randint between the size and the max height minus the size. So our respawn will be in a random position, and we will then be looking to reappear. Well, how do we reappear? We set respawn time to 0. And that means our respawn is finished happening. Okay, so that's all good. But the other thing we need to think about is, well, what if we've not got to 1 yet? How will we ever get to 1? So we're going to say an elif here. Elif respawn time is greater than 0. If it's greater than 0, we want to start counting it down. So respawn time equals respawn time minus 1. So now that we have our game logic sorted out, we need to show what's happening. So we will move down into our draw section. And the important thing here is we are used to just blitting our cop to the screen, but now this should only happen if we're not respawning. So we're going to say if respawn time is equal to 0, that's when we show the cop on screen, which is fine. The last thing we're going to do here is, instead of a score, actually we can have a score, but we're going to add into that also showing how many lives we have. So in the same way that we've got score text and then blitting that to screen, we're going to say lives text equals my font dot render, and then lives equals, and then we're going to add on the lives. But if we just try to add that on, it's going to cause us problems because that's our number being added to some words. So we say string of lives. The 1 here is for anti-alias to give us a nice smooth font and not horrible jagged pixels. And then where are we going to place that? Well, sorry, we need to have a color for that. Let's go for green. And then, so we've made our text, but we then need to put it onto the screen. So we're then going to say screen.blit, and we tell it what to blit onto it, which is the lives text. And then where are we going to blit it? Let's move it to the other end of the screen from our score. So max width minus a chunk of pixels, maybe about 100. And then same y coordinate, so 10 down. So if we look at what that looks like now, and we've got a problem here, which is that invalid destination. And that's because we need to have some coordinate brackets around the coordinates here. So it must have been killed straight away there. So I can avoid these zombies. Anytime I hit them, I lose a life. And then I respawn sometime later. It might be a good idea with the respawning to make sure that we start off with no speed and we don't accidentally bump straight into them. So what I'm going to do is go up here to the bumped part, and as well as setting a respawn, I'm going to put x speed equals 0 and y speed equals 0. So that means that if I lose a life, I will then, so I'm going to start off and move. Got 5 lives. I bump into someone there, and then I'll randomly reappear but not moving. Although I did still lose a life by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But you can see here, this is how we can get lives to respawn, and we can obviously teleport ourselves to different positions. And we should find that when it gets to 0 lives, that the game will end. The collision detection is a little bit loose here. And we can see the game ended. So that is lives and respawning for PyGame.